It's a David and Goliath story on today's video game retrospective. I'm just not sure which one is David and which one's Goliath. Hi, I'm Jacob with Video Game Retrospective, and today we are continuing our look at the Atari 7800. Last time we took a look at how the Atari 7800 almost released in 1984, before being cancelled due to a weak market and corporate shakeups at Atari. Then things changed course 2 years later, once Atari was a little more settled and the home video game market was stronger. If you haven't seen that video yet, make sure to go do so right now. I'll wait. As long as you pause the video. Okay. You done? Let's go. So it's now 1986, and you are looking to buy a brand new video game console. Ignoring Sega, you have two options: the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Atari 7800 Pro system. Let's compare the two on their specs and games and see which one was a better buy. Here are the categories we're going to be comparing: controllers, price, game library, graphics, and sound. First, a battle of the controllers. As we saw with the predecessor, the 5200, shipping with a bad controller can kill a system. So let's take a look at our challengers. The NES launched with this classic controller, featuring Nintendo's baby, the D-pad. It's a pretty decent controller, though it is a bit unergonomic with its sharp corners and aligned A and B buttons, but it's overall very solid. Atari launched with this thing. I'm really torn on this controller. The side-firing buttons are kind of mushy, and the stick is extremely stiff, but it's relatively comfortable in the hand. It's a shame that Atari reverted to placing your function buttons on the console itself, when that was one of the few things the Atari 5200 controller actually got right. Overall, Atari played it really safe with this one, but that makes it feel quite archaic. Power Regions got it much better with this controller, a clear knockoff of the NES's design. It's actually pretty good. We don't have one in our collection since they have become quite the expensive collector's item, but I have used one in the past and found it quite great, though the concept of a screw-in joystick is dumb. Stick to the D-pad. Still, the thing that is going to put the NES over the top is the sheer number of other controllers available. Nintendo and third parties made an absurd number of optional controllers. Some are just stupid, or straight up don't work, but there are an equal number of great controllers out there as well. Personally, I'm a big fan of the NES Advantage for a great arcade feel. So yeah, point to the NES. Next, let's look at the price that each system would launch at. Back in 1984, the 7800 was intended to cost $140. But the actual launch 2 years later, Atari was able to sell the systems they had sitting in a warehouse on a fire sale for $79.95, bundled with two controllers and pole position 2. The NES launched at a price of $199 for the system itself, with no pack-in title. However, prices for both systems would shift quite a bit over time as components for the NES became cheaper and Atari ran out of their initial stock of consoles and had to produce more. I've managed to find both systems in the 1987 Sears Christmas catalog. Here is the standard Atari bundle, which has actually increased in price to $90, and the NES Basic package, which now includes Super Mario Bros., is also $90. The system itself is one thing, but one area they are very different in is the price of games. Atari 7800 games were considerably cheaper, averaging $10 to $15, whereas NES games were almost always $25 to $30 each. And keep in mind that the 7800 is also backwards compatible with the 2600, and by that point, 2600 games were so cheap and overprinted, Columbia House was offering massive bundles of them for pennies. So overall, the point does go to the 7800, despite it actually getting more expensive over time. Let's talk about the overall game library now. Atari loved to say in their advertising that the number of games for the 7800 was far larger than Nintendo's offerings, which was true if you counted the entire library of 2600 games. Yeah, that claim was pretty misleading. If we were talking about the 7800 specific games, the library was pretty pathetic. Atari ran with the original launch titles for so long. The release of new games past those was painfully slow. You know how many new games were released in all of 1986? 2. Yeah. In total, 59 games would be released for the 7800 between the 1984 originals and the entire life of the system. That includes several titles that were exclusive to either North America or PAL regions as well. The vast majority of these were published by Atari themselves due to an extreme lack of third-party support, largely due to Nintendo's strict licensing agreements, locking most third parties into developing for one system or the other. And guess which system most publishers picked. Also, I know this is minor in the grand scheme of things, but Atari cut costs pretty drastically as the system aged by printing the game labels in black and white instead of color, which is awful. In comparison, the NES would have just over 700 officially licensed games for it. I think we know which one wins this one. Next, let's look at the graphics. If you remember from our first part, was one of the most impressive things about the 7800. Both systems used very similar CPUs based on the MOS 6502, even running at the same speed, 1.79 MHz. So this battle will come down to their individual graphics processing chips. Even though it had been years since the design of the 7800's chipset, its Maria chip was still incredibly impressive and blisteringly fast. The most notable thing when discussing the Maria is its flexibility. Any stat I can spit out about it would have multiple asterisks attached to it, since the system had many ways to push past the most typically used limits for number of sprites on screen, sprite colors, overall resolution, and more, but with each taking a lot of processing power, requiring developers to pick and choose what matters most at particular moments of gameplay in their games. However, that does require a lot of skill to program. A really well-made 7800 game far exceeds anything the NES could do, whereas less impressive titles just looked like 5200 games. So I'm very excited to say that the point goes to the Sega Master System, which beats both of them easily. Okay, fine. The 7800 can have the point. And now, sound. Point to Nintendo. So yeah, it's not surprising to see just how the NES ended up being the victor of this contest by far. Even factoring in PAL regions, where the battle was a lot less one-sided, and excluding Asia, where the 7800 was never sold, the NES would still outsell the 7800 around 30-1. The 7800 would remain on sale until 1991 as an extreme budget console. It, along with several other Atari systems that were languishing in purgatory, would have their support ended so Atari could focus on their future projects, like the Jaguar. But that's a story for another day. I'm sorry to any hardcore 7800 fans who might take my opinions on the system as quite negative, but I honestly don't see that much of a reason for this system to exist. Maybe, if Atari had released it in 1984, it would have gained enough momentum to put up a bigger threat, or maybe it would have been best to write it off as a bad idea and not release it at all. One consequence of the lukewarm life of the 7800 is that it and the failure of the 5200 would doom the next console Atari released, the XE game system, a computer/game console hybrid that I actually really like, that could have done much better had consumers been able to trust Atari. But with several false starts under their belt, that wasn't going to happen. It's pretty much the exact same thing that happened to Sega in the 90s. You would think that with all that negativity, I would advise you to not add a 7800 to your collection, but actually, you'd be wrong. One of the big reasons is that the 7800 is one of the single most interesting systems out there for getting into homebrew games. Homebrew took a long time to appear on the 7800 thanks to a lockout built into the system, preventing the use of unlicensed carts, but since that was solved in 2001, we've seen an explosion of independently made games for the system thanks to dedicated fans and great publishing from the folks at Atari age. Seriously, the number of homebrew titles available is approaching the number of officially licensed games released on the system. That's nuts! Now let's take a look at the ratings. Rarity, 3 out of 5. You won't have that much trouble finding this one for sale online, but they aren't that common to find in local stores. Price, 3 out of 5. Systems remain relatively cheap, but the average price for games is a bit on the high side. Aesthetics, 4 out of 5. I love the 80s Atari silver aesthetic. Looks great. The only question is which looks better, the North American model or the PAL model? You can debate that in the comments. Games, 3 out of 5. If we were only counting the officially licensed games for this system, it probably would have gotten a 2, since the library is relatively small, and although games are usually pretty good, there's very little that you can't find somewhere else. But those homebrew games are just really exciting. Convenience, 4 out of 5. This system is a pretty easy one to just pick up on a whim and run with. No odd proprietary ports, no notable console-killing hardware issues. Basically, the exact opposite of the 5200. The main thing knocking it down from 5 is a lack of a composite video out, though you can make that modification yourself if so inclined. I really hope you guys enjoyed this look at the Atari 7800. Let me know down in the comments below what classic video game console you'd like to see us cover next time. If you'd like to discuss all the many amazing retro video game consoles out there, you can do so on our Discord server. And of course, if you'd like to help keep this show going, you can check out our Patreon where you can support us and get some nice bonuses. And I'll see you guys next time.